Hey there, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us. So in this exam bootcamp session, we are going to be unpacking a bunch of the free response questions from the 2023 AP Music Theory exam. So here at Auralia Musician, we get to work with lots of institutions, high schools, universities, curriculum boards from all around the world. And it's fair to say that this exam in particular is probably one of the more rigorous ones that we've kind of seen in terms of the sheer amount of content that needs to be covered and the level of the content. So it has all sorts of challenges attached to it. It's great to see lots of teachers and also students joining us today. And for all your students, great to have you here. Hopefully you've been doing lots of singing and lots of kind of building of core fundamental skills during the course of the year, which will set you up really well for the exam. No doubt some of the discussions we'll have today will perhaps echo things that your teachers have been telling you all year or working through with you all year as well. But hopefully we'll be able to also offer some little tips, tricks, or strategies for tackling some of these question types. So, just a quick bit of housekeeping. My name is Tim Wilson, and I'm joined by my colleague Peter Lee today, who will be manning the Q&A. So if you have any questions, please pop them in there. I am going to launch just a quick poll. This will just help drive some of our discussions today and kind of determine how much time we linger on each of the question types in the exam. So if you're happy to pop some responses in there, that would be great. And finally, we are, of course, recording the webinar. So if you need to share this with colleagues or review it later, then we'll be sharing it via email post webinar. Okay, so let's jump in and start with free response 1 and 2. So in approaching any of these question types, I think it's really useful to also just consider what we already know about the question types, what's occurred in previous exams, and just look at some of the data and the stats, not because I love data and statistics, but they can be really useful in informing how we go about preparing for the exam, how we go about teaching our students and guiding them towards having the right skill set to be able to kind of manage the exam most effectively. And for students, having a little bit of this knowledge can also help you to make, I guess, informed decisions, informed guesses in some cases, if need be, in perhaps cases where you've run out of replays on a melodic dictation question, or you can't quite hear the quality of a chord. Being able to use some of this other information to just guide some of those choices that you make. So really quickly here, looking at free response 1 and 2, what do we know? Most of this information won't be news to you, but of course we get one melody in a major key, one in a minor key. In the minor key, it is possible to get melodic minor form of the scale. So that will, of course, introduce raised scale degrees 6 and 7. Traditionally, we'll get one of the questions will be in 4/4, the other in 6/8. Starting and finishing on the tonic is a useful one to know. And a few stats here. So over the last kind of 10 years of the AP exam, pretty much almost 3/4 of the melodic motion in these two question types has been stepwise, and with the melodic ending moving from scale degree 2 to 1 or from scale degree 7 to 1. Use of chromaticism, of course, you'll all be very familiar with the use of raised scale degree 4 or Phi as the kind of color chromatic note that's used in usually just one of the questions. And finally, just the number of points that are allocated here. So 9 points are allocated to each of these question types. And again, this can be useful, I guess, if you know, as a student, when you're working through the exam, if you need to make decisions over, you know, which questions to perhaps prioritize your time and energy towards. Okay, let's jump in now and have a look at some of these questions. So I've mocked up a little exam here in Auralia Musician that will just allow us to work through it and get some kind of immediate feedback as we complete each question. So you'll see here I've allocated 10 replays to each of these questions here, just so we have a bit more of a chance to step through some strategies for each of the question types as we go. In regard to strategies for melodic dictation, there are many different kinds of approaches that people take. We might try a few. I'd like to start by, on the first play, essentially just mapping out a bit of a contour map or a contour diagram. This could be a kind of a scribble, you know, a squiggled line that you could do on paper if you're doing it on paper. I'm just going to put in quarter notes or crotchets, as we like to call them here in Australia, to kind of map out that contour. A few other things we should note before we start is the information that we are given. I'll just zoom in a little bit here. So we're given a starting note of E flat, which is our tonic, and a key signature with 3 flats, clearly indicating that we are in the key of E flat major here. So we know we're going to start and finish on this E flat. So let's begin. We'll have our first listen, and I'm going to map out a very rough kind of melodic contour as a starting place for us. Okay, so very rough indeed, but we know we finish on the E flat there, so I'm going to put that in there as our last note. So this provides a basic kind of framework here for us to work with, and then we can start to flesh this out with other information on additional kinds of listenings. So one other thing that I kind of noticed on that first playing was I didn't hear any non-diatonic notes, so I didn't hear any kind of chromaticism. So on a first kind of listening, it can be really good to listen out for these kind of key elements and key kind of distinguishing melodic features. It also felt quite stepwise in its motion, with only a few kind of smaller kind of skips or leaps. So having this kind of general overview contour map can be really useful in helping to create that initial framework. Okay, so let's have another listen, and we'll start to flesh this out a little bit more. And we can use this final note, our E flat, again as a bit of a reference point as well, and work backwards from that. Okay, so we fleshed out that first bar a little bit with the rhythm there. Again, we identified a lot of stepwise motion, but now I'm going to jump to the end using that E flat reference note as our reference there to kind of guide us to making choices about these other pitches here. So I kind of quite clearly, you know, whilst I inputted that, the middle 2 bars were playing, and then I was able to direct my attention more towards the final bar. So again, that might be a strategy that you may want to try out as well, starting from the first bar, then working with the last bar, and then starting to fill in the inner bars. So what I heard here was a little bit of a leap here, and I definitely heard a motion going from scale degree 5 down to the tonic, and this definitely sounded like going from scale degree 2, re to sol to do to me. Something else that I kind of observed as we were working through here was a bunch of stepwise motion, and then into this third bar here where I kind of heard the tonic, heard the sound of that home. So getting used to really strongly having a sense of hearing that home kind of pitch and what scale degree one feels like, and the kind of sense of release that kind of comes with that. And approaching that was again some stepwise motion that sounded a bit like this, leading into it by step. Okay, so we fleshed this out a little bit. Let's have another listen and see where we're at. So I had to correct that there. That should have been scale degree 5. So I've now resolved that. But again, that stepwise motion that we identified from beat 2 of bar 1 there kind of helps to make that nice and clear. And then identifying beat 1 of bar 3 as being the tonic, again, is kind of that good reference point. Now we'll note here the rhythm changed a little bit here, and we can pop some additional notes in here. Let's have one more listen. Okay, so we'll change that to the G there. We could hear that slightly larger interval there, and then also just referencing that F in bar 4 there. So I think I'm fairly happy with that. I will now submit it and we can check our answer there. Let's have one last listen to this before we move on. Okay, so just to touch base again on those, some of those strategies that we had a quick look at that you may want to play around with. Creating a contour map or diagram, identifying any distinguishing features in the melody or target notes. One that I didn't mention there is the importance of memorizing and kind of internalizing the melody is really, really essential. Being able to imitate the melody, sing the melody back, is a kind of core skill. It also enables you to, utilize the time between plays to actually do more work, rather than, as in when I say more work, input some of the note values rather than having to wait for the next play. So by having that melody internalized and memorized where possible, that means you can be essentially playing it back in your head, so that you can then be entering it as you work. So as far as strategies, to build up those skills, I would definitely focus on that as part of your work over the next month, as far as ways to approach this question type in the exam. And then just those few other items we looked at, notating the rhythm first can be another approach. Complete the rhythm for the entire excerpt, then go back and enter the pitches. That's probably not one I would tend to use as much, but some people do use that a lot. Notating the start and finish, then fill in the gaps. And then finally, I just wanted to mention the importance of working on just increasing fluency and the speed with which you can respond. Obviously, on the exam itself, you'll get either 3 or 4 replays for these question types, which will limit the number of hearings you get. So working on trying to deal with these strategies in a quick and efficient manner, and kind of improving your fluency and speed as exam day approaches can be a really good approach to take, or just something to be aware of as part of the process. So, all right. We'll quickly have a look at free response 2. without spending too much time, because I want to make sure we get time to tackle all the question types here. But let's have a quick listen through, and maybe we'll just start off by identifying some key melodic or distinguishing melodic elements of this melody. Again, it's important to look at the information we are provided with. We're starting on B, we know we're going to finish on B, and we have a key signature of 2 sharps, which indicates we are in the key of B minor. As I said earlier, this may also mean some of the pitches from the melodic minor scale may be introduced. So we may get a G sharp and an A sharp included here in addition to the diatonic notes. Let's have a quick listen and see if anything stands out in this melody. Okay, so there's a quick little contour map. So a couple of things that stand out about this melody to me straight up. Again, quite a lot of stepwise motion. So using your reference points, the B at the start and the end, you can kind of work, forwards and backwards from those points. Given that there was apparently no chromaticism in the previous question, we know there's probably a fairly high chance then there will be a chromatic note in this particular question. And I think over the last 10 years or even possibly 20 years, this has pretty much always been the raised scale degree 4 or Phi, aside from I think 2015, which it was in a minor key and there was a raised scale degree 3. So listening out for that in this particular example is kind of a good strategy to take. And I think we did hear that kind of towards the end of the second bar there. The other item that I think was in here was the use of the melodic minor scale around here, approaching the tonic in here somewhere. Let's have one more listen and see if we can flesh this out just a tiny bit more, and then we'll let Auralia correct this for us. All right, so let's put something like this in here. So I heard use of G sharp. Sorry, this is actually starting from F sharp here, G sharp, A sharp up to the B. And our other little chromatic note in here does appear to be raised scale degree 4. Okay, so one other quick item here, again, given that we're in a minor key, commonly scale degree 7 will be raised almost, not always, but in many cases that it occurs in the melody. So my second note here, excuse me, I will raise to be an A sharp there. Okay, so we haven't quite got this right, but let's have one quick lesson and see if we can fix up the rhythm. Okay, so something like that. Our last bar is not correct, but what we're going to do is we're going to submit this now and get some nice feedback. Okay, so clearly I didn't quite get the rhythm right on that bar, and we can see here where both my rhythm and my pitches were incorrect there. Let's have one more listen. So hopefully hopefully, all the singing and the preparatory work you've been doing during the year, singing minor scales, natural minor, harmonic minor, melodic minor scales, will help to also inform how you hear the materials in these types of questions as well. Okay, next we'll move into some harmonic dictation. Just before we do, again, it's important to just reference the information we do know about this question type, and a couple of things that can, yes, again, just help inform the choices we make during these questions. So one major, one minor across free response 3 and 4. Over the last 10 years, 66% of the questions have finished with an authentic cadence and motion in the upper part of scale degree 2-1 or 7-1. We know that there will be either a secondary, most likely be a secondary dominant occur. And again, this graph here shows that where chromatic chords have occurred in the last 10 years, 50% of the time they have in fact been a secondary 5-6-5 of 5 chord. And there've only been a couple of occasions where other chords have appeared, and only I think it was only one occasion where a secondary leading tone chord was used as part of this question. Again, hopefully some of the work you've done over the course of the year in understanding common practice phrase models will come in handy here as well, as far as some of the choices you make. And it may also be useful to know that these question types are worth 24 points. If you haven't kind of explored some of the phrase model elements, it might be good to touch base with your teacher in regard to some of those, because that can be really useful in just helping you make certain choices. And I'll talk a bit more about that as we work through one of these questions. Okay, so free response 3 here, we can see again the information we're given. We're in C minor in 4/4 with 3 flats. We're given a root note here, a tonic of C, and the third of the key here. Okay, so again, on this first play, we're just going to try and make some general observations about the shape of the line. Are there any chromatic chords? Do any particular chords stand out as having that non-diatonic sound? And also just keeping an ear out for stepwise motion or any other kind of special qualities that may occur here. Okay, so the first thing to consider may be that since the last chord we heard was, of course, the last chord, did we feel as though we ended up in a place of rest? Did we feel as though we ended up on the 1 chord? And so I would say yes to that. So I'm just going to pop a C in there. A couple of other things to consider here are on that first pass, some of the, particularly the bass notes, appeared to be repeated. So the static felt, the harmony felt a little more kind of static in that sense, and that can kind of point to the use of certain harmonic vocabulary, which we'll flesh out in a moment. It also felt as though a lot of the movement in the soprano was very much kind of stepwise to me. I didn't hear any kind of large leaps, which of course is also quite common to this style of writing too. Let's listen again now. Again, a common strategy here would be to take down the bass part first, then look at adding the soprano part, then taking a deeper listen at the quality of each of the chords, and then potentially using our theoretical knowledge based on what we've transcribed for the bass and the soprano to again inform the choices we make for the Roman numerals that we enter. And I would note, thank you for your responses to the poll, that one of the question types that a lot of you indicated was one of the more challenging ones was in fact free response 3 and 4. So we'll try and spend a little more time here. Okay, let's try and take down the bass part this time. Okay, so the bass part, it's quite pronounced. Again, as I mentioned, for me, one of the distinguishing features here is that you could hear the bass kind of stays, kind of repeats the 3 notes, the first 3 notes, and then you hear repeated notes again occurring later in bar 2 here. So once we transcribe the soprano, we'll talk a bit more about some of those implications, but they do point to some specific harmonic vocabulary that you have hopefully studied or taught during the year. Okay, let's take down the soprano part now. Okay, so again, that felt quite stepwise. I am going to update this pitch here. As we know, in C minor, approaching our final kind of tonic chord, the scale degree 7 is going to be raised like that to provide a leading tone to pull towards the tonic note there. So if students are having issues kind of hearing those 2 different parts, there are a bunch of different strategies you can take in the lead up as preliminary kinds of exercises to approaching this. So one could be to do drills like this where you perhaps remove the alto and the tenor voices, so students are only hearing the 2 outer voices, the soprano and the bass. It removes some of the, I guess, the noise from what's going on there. In Auralia, we also offer a little mixer controller as well, so you can have students do a bunch of these types of exercises, and if you enable it, you can allow students to actually adjust the level of each of the voices to make them more or less pronounced. You can of course set thresholds on these so students can't completely mute a voice. This can be really good for yes, allowing students to to a degree isolate a voice, hear it with a little more clarity, but then also still hear it in the context of the other voices too. Can be one of those really good kind of building block type exercises to assist your students in getting up to these exam level type skills. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit more about these repeated bass notes. So really common, let's start in just our kind of final 3 chords here. A really common thing when you hear a repeated scale degree 5 is it almost, not always, but will commonly imply a cadential 6/4. So this is kind of reinforced here by this movement in the soprano. So we have tonic, do moving to T, back to do. So that kind of motion also reinforces a cadential 6/4. So what I'm going to do here is just switch over to my chord mode, and before we go any further, I'm going to put my cadential 6/4 in here, going to a 1 chord, and we'll talk a little bit more about the qualities of some of these chords in a moment. Next, coming back to the start here, we have the 3 consecutive Cs, 3 consecutive do's. Now, this kind of movement or lack of movement often indicates, again, some kind of 6/4 progression, and in this case, a pedal 6/4 progression. So we can see in the soprano, that also reinforces that as a decision point. So I'm just going to pop this in, and then we can go back and listen again. But I guess one of the key takeaways here is if we pay a lot of attention to transcribing the bass and the soprano parts as accurately as we can use that information to then inform our what we enter for our Roman numerals. So I'm going to enter root position tonic chord here, and our pedal 6/4 will go into a 4 chord in second inversion, and then back to our tonic chord. Okay, so we've got a bit of a framework here to work with. Let's have another listen. All right, so chord 4 here. I've just paused here. Obviously you can't do that in the exam, but I just wanted to highlight this chord for a moment. So I've got scale degrees 5 in the bass here, sol, and re in the soprano, which will kind of indicates a 5 chord. It also, the chord to me, if I had to describe its character in a very general way, it kind of feels a bit crunchy. So when I think of the word crunchy, to me that indicates a little bit more tension in the chord, which indicates perhaps the use of a 7th chord. So particularly on a 5 chord, when you introduce a 7th into the chord, as you know, you end up with a tritone interval between the chordal 3rd and the chordal 7th. So in this case, between a B natural and an F natural. So that will create that extra tension and crunch in the chord that can help to identify it. So I'm going to enter this as 5/7 for now, and we can listen back again on the next attempt here. So I'm going to listen out for that same sort of crunch though when we get over here, just in case a 7th has been introduced in this second last chord as well. All right, let's keep playing. So we'll listen out on this chord and try to determine what's going on here. Okay, so I didn't hear that same kind of tension or crunch on that chord, so I'm going to leave that as just a straight triad here. Okay, so moving back to these chords, there's a few things that are indicated by the notes that we have already transcribed. So first of all here, scale degree 6 in the bass and scale degree 1 in the soprano. This pretty much lends itself to implying a 6 chord with that kind of deceptive resolution coming from the 5. So let's run with that for now. And approaching our kind of dominant area here, again, this refers back to our knowledge of kind of common practice chord syntax, so and phrase models. So prior to a kind of a dominant area that's going to resolve to 1, we're most often going to see some kind of predominant chord, which, as I'm sure you know, is most often going to be, well, a predominant chord is going to be a 4 chord or a 2 chord. So looking here, we have an F in the bass. So this is going to imply a few different things. So it could be perhaps a 4 chord, F minor chord, just looking at the bass note, or it could perhaps be a 2 chord in second inversion. So now looking to our soprano, this again helps inform that decision. So we have scale degree 2 here, which means that this probably has to be a 2 chord in second inversion. It may also have a 7th, but we'll listen back on this in a moment. One other thing I should have mentioned is your knowledge of diatonic chords in a key is really important, and you may choose to kind of sketch these out, excuse me, as part of an exercise like this. So you could do some things like this. We either just sketch out the note names or some of the chords, so that you can refer to something like that as you work through question types like this. So that way, when we're talking about a 2 chord and comparing it with a 4 chord, we can immediately see that the main notes that are different there are the D versus the C, whereas the F and the A flat are common to both chords. Okay, let's have one final listen before we move on, and we might have to skip over a few of these other question types, but in here, let's try and be conscious of listening out for the chord quality of this chord, and also on this 2 chord to try and figure out if there may be a 7th in there. So perhaps listening out for a little bit more density in the chord. There'll be less of a sense of kind of tension or crunch on a 7th chord on a 2 chord, mainly because the 7th is of a 2 chord is actually the tonic of the key, and if it's in one of the inner voices, it will probably be A, harder to hear, and B, provide perhaps less tension in the overall kind of feel of the chord. All right, let's have another listen. Okay, so for me, that feels like a major chord, and for me on the 2 here, essentially, I couldn't hear the tonic of the key in there. It didn't sound any denser to me, so I'm going to run with that as it stands. I just saw a question pop up quickly in the chat about how do we determine what the inversion is. So this is going to be largely driven by hearing the bass line and being able to notate that correctly first. So here, if we're looking at, say we're looking at our 2 chord here, I've determined that I know that the notes in this chord, again by referring to my knowledge of diatonic chords, I know that the notes are D, F, and A flat. So when I'm in here, I've already identified that the F is the note that is in the bass. So that means that this chord is in first inversion. So normally if it was in root position, there would be a D in the bass here. But I've got the F in the bass here, and the D is actually up in the soprano part there. So I hope that helps answer that query. Again, Auralia musician, can provide lots and lots of kind of core skill development where you can learn to, write all your diatonic chords and your inversions in isolation, so that when you come into these question types, you can then be really comfortable and familiar with the chord structures and how to label and write these chords. Okay, let's submit this. And we've done okay, except just for the last little section here, I of course entered the pitches incorrect. So where I should have entered a G's, I entered B flats. So that is my bad. Here of course is the correct answer, and we can listen back one. So we're fast running out of time, so I might skip through a few of these next question types, but essentially applying those same strategies is really important. Listening out for distinguishing features, distinguishing movement. Can you locate the position of the chromatic chord? And also identifying, is the final chord, does it feel as though it's in a place of rest? Is it resolved? Does it feel as though you've ended up on the 1 chord? Or have you perhaps ended up on the 5 chord or even the 6 chord? Okay, so let's move. We might jump ahead now to free response 6, the 4-part writing. And I've set this question up so we can actually check our answer a bit as we work through this and explore a few options and kind of common errors that can occur here. Okay, so as a preliminary kind of exercise to any of these sorts of questions, you may be used to kind of documenting the chords that occur in the notes that occur in each chord in a fashion similar to this. So you may be used to kind of scribbling out the chords or just scribbling out the note names for each of the chords. We are in A major here. So this is quite a common strategy that many instructors use, and basically writing out the note names of each note of the chord, and then identifying what the bass note will be. In this case, I have put little squares around the bass notes, and then identifying the tendency tones and the way that they will potentially, will need to resolve. So as you know, chordal sevenths have to resolve down by step. So I've drawn a line from my chordal seventh here, D, down to C sharp. The leading note in most cases will want to pull towards the tonic. So that's what I've indicated here. And similarly here, I have also indicated the chordal seventh pulling down to the third of the next chord. And here we could also indicate that the kind of temporary leading tone will want to pull towards D. So I could also draw a line there. Just while we're looking at this view, we might just talk really quickly about how to determine this chord, the chromatic chord in this progression. So firstly, we want to look at the target chord, which is 4. And in the key of A major, how do we figure out what the 4 chord is? We can count up. So A, B, C, D, and I'm just using raw, pitch names here without any accidentals. But A, B, C, D, so we know it's a D chord, and the D chord in F major is a major chord, D, F sharp, and A. So then the next thing we need to do is determine what is the 5 of D. So again, we can count up. So we start from D, D, E, F, G, A. Again, just using raw pitch names without any accidentals. So we know that A is the 5th of D, our 4 chord here. So what this means is we can write A, C sharp, E, and then our 7th here is the chromatic note. This is the one that has been altered. We know that in A major, we would normally have a G sharp, but this is the chromatic note in this key. So hopefully that helps you to kind of figure out some of these chords. Definitely with any chromatic chord, if you look at your target chord, figure out what that is, and then work kind of backwards from there to determine either the 5 chord or perhaps the leading tone chord of your target chord. That can assist in figuring that out. Okay, so another way, just really quickly, to view this information is, I'll just zoom out a little bit, is in a matrix like this. So you may have seen this sort of thing done before. Akira Sato has some fantastic videos where he uses these kinds of matrices with students. And the thing I love about these as well is that they basically indicate this kind of core information, but they also show voice leading paths through the chord progression, which obviously for 4-part writing is essential. So let's have a look here. So basically I have the scale starting from A, but I've also got the leading tone in my bottom row here, and my chords in the very, very bottom row there. And then I'm just going up through the major scale, and I've also included the flattened scalary 7 here, which is required for this chord as we discussed just before. So all the kind of highlighted notes here are the chord notes, and we can see all these beautiful pathways that move between each note from chord to chord. You'll see I've also indicated on the chordal sevenths and leading tones the kind of tendency direction that those notes traditionally need to resolve. So leading tone wanting to go up, chordal seventh wanting to go down. Here, the kind of temporary leading tone wanting to go up to the D, and the chordal seventh here wanting to resolve down to the F sharp. So as I said, you don't need to use these, but these can be fantastic, perhaps in the classroom, leading up to exams, to use as ways to build core understanding of chord structure, and also building core understanding of voice leading pathways through a chord progression, and having students sing these so that they can be also orally kind of absorbing that information as well. At the end of the day, the perfect situation is for us all to have a really strong both oral and theoretical knowledge of what's occurring in all these types of different question types, so that our ears can support our theoretical knowledge, and our theoretical knowledge can also support our ears and our oral skills. Okay, so we can, commonly a student may be referencing this sort of diagram whilst they are working through these sorts of questions. I won't be doing this in this case, but we'll work through a few of these question types and look at some common challenges. So what I'm going to start with is by entering the bass part. So this is a really common approach to begin with. The bass part is generally much more prescriptive, given the chord symbols. So I'm going to come here into A, go to G sharp, back to A, as we identified before from our chord diagram, which I can actually bring up here as well to refer to if we need to. In our fourth chord here, C sharp is going to be our root note. Then going up to D, and then we may as well keep ascending by a step there, and then I will jump down to the A as my resting place. Okay, so that's a good starting point. Secondly, we might start from, we'll jump up to the soprano and look at entering the soprano. By focusing here in the soprano, trying to write a line that is quite smooth, so not making big jumps, using stepwise motion where possible, and also trying to move contrary motion to the bass part. That will put us in a really good place for taking care of a lot of the other voice leading rules. If we kind of take care of that and then populate, spell the chords, then and deal with the kind of tendency tone resolutions, a lot of the other kind of voice leading rules will actually kind of get taken care of. One thing I should mention, since we are talking about chord spelling, as you all know, the triangle of death can have a severe impact upon your results here. So it's really important to get the chord spelling correct. Otherwise, you will lose voice leading marks in and out of the chord that you have incorrectly spelled. So that is kind of essential here. So coming to our soprano part, we can see here the bass descends and then ascends. So I'm going to start off by ascending. I'm going to break my own rule here, and rather than following that kind of contrary motion pathway here and going back to the A, I'm going to jump up to the C sharp here, mainly because I want to illustrate some of the other common errors that could occur. I'm going to keep going here with the C sharp. This is going to cause all sorts of other voice leading errors for us, but I'm just going to follow this pathway for the moment. We might jump down to the A here, and then go to the G sharp, and then perhaps we'll break another voice leading rule here, which will become apparent in a moment, and go down to the E. Okay, let's populate the inner voices here, just so we can then check our feedback. I'm going to select voice 2 here. So the soprano and tenor voices are typically less exciting melodically, often a lot more kind of static in their movement. And of course, it's okay to maintain the same note in the same voice if it occurs in the next chord. Okay, now we do need to introduce our G sharp here, so I might just bring that in here, and I will rush through this a little bit just so we can have time to explore a couple of other things. Okay, and finally to our tenor part, let's do a few things like this. And all right, so we have all sorts of kind of incomplete chords here and voice leading errors, but I just want to show you, check my answer here. This will be quite colorful. So we can see some of the things that have gone astray. So over here on the right, we can highlight a few items here. So, and they will then be soloed on the notation. So first of all, I'd like to look at this unresolved leading tone here. So we've kind of got a few errors here that are kind of connected. So first of all, because we've misspelt this chord, we've ended up kind of doubling the C sharp here. And in this chord, the C sharp is actually our kind of temporary leading tone as we go towards the 4 chord, towards D. So in the key of D, C sharp is the leading tone. So this is a big no-no. So we can't double this. So what we need to do is sort out our kind of spelling of this chord, and that should actually help resolve some of these issues. Now, in bar 2 here, you can see we have some parallel fifths going on. We also have unresolved leading tone here. The G sharp in the soprano always has to ascend up to the A. And then this has also kind of contributed to us having some hidden fifths. And we've also, of course, omitted the the C sharp on this final chord. So what I'm going to do is we're going to step back here, and we're going to revoice a few of these chords a little bit, just to make this a little bit simpler. So as I mentioned earlier, by following that kind of contrary motion pathway with our bass, between our bass and our soprano, that will set us up for generally for a more successful outcome. So I'm just going to adjust some of my parts here, and let me just do something like this. And I'm just going to change my soprano part around here to follow a bit more of that that contrary motion. And we do get this kind of nice stepwise pathway here. That looks a little bit like this. We could kind of go G sharp potentially up to the A there, but let's run with this and finish on the E. Now, we'll check our answer here again and see if we have any lingering issues. So our score's getting a bit better, so this is looking promising. We still, of course, have some parallel fifths, contrary fifths, and an omission going on. So let's try to resolve that in this last chord, and then deal with these parallel fifths here. Okay, so let's start by just jumping back to our alto part here. So what I'd like to do is change this to a C sharp here. So now this final chord has the third, it's complete chord. And let's check this answer and see if we're getting there. And we're pretty close now, apart from our parallel fifths and the omission of the G sharp here. Okay, so what we will do is in our tenor part here, we're going to put the G sharp in that chord. And so that will then kind of remove those parallel fifths. Let's check our answer one final time. All right, fantastic. So that has all ended up without any errors, and we can of course play that back as well to orally reinforce that. Okay, we are fast running out of time here. So a couple of other quick little things. I'd love to talk about sight singing, the two-part composition side of things. This is a challenging question format. We won't have time to go into this in detail, but a couple of quick things to note here that can help guide the choices you make. So looking towards the end of each phrase is obviously key in identifying a cadence point or particular harmonic vocabulary that you can plug in here. So end of phrase 2 here, we're in the key of F major, we have raised scale degree 4. So this is going to imply some kind of chromatic chord here. So that will immediately kind of point to something like, A5, 5 or 5, 7 of 5, moving to 5. You have scale degree 5 in the soprano part there. So that can be a good one to be aware of. Look out for sharp 4 or phi, and that will really commonly point to a progression like that. The end of the next phrase here finishes on scale degree 7. So this is most logically going to point to some kind of 5 chord, and it's probably going to be preceded by some kind of predominant chord, either a 2 or a 4 chord. We have scale degree kind of 2 and 1 here, which probably points to something a bit more along these kind of lines, or it could be a 2-6-5, or it could even come from perhaps a 2 chord prior to that. And then finally, and again, apologies, I'm kind of rushing through this so we can get to some sight singing. In our last little bit here, we can see 3, 2, 1, and this points really beautifully to a cadential 6/4. Hopefully, again, this is something that you have either taught or touched base or discovered as a student during the year. So using those key formulae that you have learnt and knowing where to apply them is kind of key to success in free response 7. Okay, really quickly, let's jump into some sight singing here. Again, key strategies here are looking for common vocabulary, patterns, shapes, and things that you have learnt during the year. So things that I'm looking out for here straight away, I can see I have a key signature of 2 sharps. I'm starting and finishing on D, so I'm in the key of D major. I have no chromatic notes here at all. I can see I start with an ascending D major arpeggio, which is hopefully something I've practiced a fair bit during the year. And then I have lots of kind of stepwise motion. So hopefully I feel fairly confident with that. One of the trickier parts of this sight singing melody is this little leap here. So down from scale degree 5 to 1, sol to do, and then back up to 4 or fa. So I would kind of, as a strategy, perhaps, isolate that, try and practice that on its own. And you can even sing the scale and kind of outline those scale degrees so that you can kind of hear them. And let me play the tonic. Apologies in advance for my lack of vocal tone and control. Some of you may be able to relate to this. Hopefully, many of you are much more skillful. But here's our tonic. So if I kind of find my way up to scale degree 5 here, ma 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 ma. So I found my way up to the A here, ma 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 ma, so do. So that by kind of singing the scale from 1 up to 5, 5 back down to 1, I can outline that interval and then sing it in as part of the scale and then sing it in isolation. So that can be a kind of useful technique. Someone's asking about sight singing in minor. I'll hopefully get a chance to look at that in a minute. So similarly, as far as moving back up to scale degree 4, fa, ma 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 ma. So again, singing the notes of the scale between those two notes to outline them, and then try to sing them in isolation can really help. All right, let me make an attempt at this melody just to show you how this works in Auralia. Just to give you a bit of idea. Ma 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 ma. Okay, so not my finest work, but when I'm practicing these things in Auralia, I can then, just to give you a bit of idea, play back my answer. Ma 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 ma. All right, I think that's more than enough of my singing for all of us today. But yeah, hopefully some of those strategies can assist, looking for those key kind of patterns. And finally, let's just move into the minor scale, minor key example. Starting on F, finishing on F, 4 flats. So we are, of course, in the key of F minor here. Now, this melody, again, has a few distinguishing features. Starts off with lots of stepwise motion down the major, down the tonic triad, some more stepwise motion, introduction of a little bit of chromaticism here, again, the raised scale degree 4, or Fi, as a neighbor tone to scale degree 5, and then a few little jumps here, and this is pretty nasty, College Board, a diminished 5th jump from B flat down to E natural here before getting back to the tonic. So a couple of strategies here. You can see that the melody uses a mix of kind of natural minor and harmonic minor scale of those two scales. So ma ma, this one's in an interesting vocal range for me, but as a starting point, I would practice singing natural minor scale. Ma 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 ma. I'd also practice singing the harmonic minor scale so that you can get used to hearing the raised scale degree 7th, which occurs later here. Ma 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 ma. And again, apologies, this is quite low for me. So I would use that as a bit of a technique. Also singing the tonic triads, as we identified, these occur a few times here. Ma 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 ma. So singing those triads can really help to outline that tonic, that sense of home. And you could also alternate that with singing, like the 4 chord or the 5 chord as well, to just again bring home those core kind of harmonic elements that are often implied by melodies. So as I said, stepwise, I would think about this as stepwise with then a bit of the arpeggio. As far as this scale degree, ma 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 ma, I would kind of isolate that ma da ba da da, as opposed to ma ba 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 da da. So thinking of that as being like the C there as being your anchor, and treating that B natural as like a temporary little leading note into the C. And then as far as a strategy for dealing for these quite tricky leaps, I would apply similar techniques to what we did on the previous sight singing example. So, ma, 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 ma. So I would find scale degree 5 and then sing down to scale degree 2. Ma, 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 so, re, ma, 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 ma. And then I would do a similar thing to deal with this nasty interval here. Ma, da, ba, da, ba, da, ma. So fa, ma, 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 ma. So again, singing those notes of the scale, isolating that nasty interval, so then you can sing it on its own. So hopefully, again, I'll try and sing it in that octave. We'll see how we go. Ma, 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 ma. So again, not my finest work, but just trying to illustrate their strategies for targeting those distinct intervals and notes within this particular melody. So hopefully applying some of those techniques can be really, really useful. Okay, we are just about done. We've kind of chatted about a lot of those strategies here already. Just before we finish up, I did want to mention for any of you who are not already using Auralia Musician in your classrooms, it may be of interest to know that we've kind of been looking just at exam level materials today. Auralia and Musician include lots of these that you can use with your students, but we also include loads and loads of materials that provide really lots of finely scaffolded levels for your students that are all mapped to the CED. So we have our ear training materials under Auralia, theory under Musician, we have an AP music theory specific syllabus. And if you were to go to a topic like, say, 4-part writing, you can start from Unit 4, dealing with lots of fundamentals in isolation, and then actually start working on some part writing skills where you're only having to deal with, say, writing, resolving chord 5 to 1. And then, of course, we can start to deal with other concepts, resolving 5/7 to 1, all the way up to exam level, dealing with secondary, dominant and secondary leading tone chords, until you end up with some questions that look a little bit more like what you might see in the exam. That check my answer option is available on all those questions as well, meaning you can get great annotated feedback as you work through all the questions. I will pop a link to the AP Music Theory specific info on our website into the chat. And it might be also useful to know that this link I'm sending through actually includes a bunch of the questions that we have worked through today. So you can use this with your students or as a student and actually practice. I think there are at least 4 or 5 of the free response questions we did today from the 2023 exam at that link. So check that out, share with students and friends. Another thing that may be of interest for teachers is our private Facebook group, which is a great community for people who are both using the programs or not necessarily using the programs to discuss, ear training, theory training, strategies and techniques, but also sharing Auralia Musician materials and ideas for kind of best practice in the classroom. So that is all from me. I hope today was really useful for you in some ways. We will be sharing the recording we covered a lot of ground and did have to assume some kind of, prior knowledge and foundational skills, but hopefully there were some useful tips, tricks and strategies in there for you. Best of luck for the 15th of May for the exam, and yeah, please reach out via the Auralia Musician website if you have any questions. In the meantime, I will hang around in the chat for a few moments if anyone has any further questions, but otherwise take care and hopefully see you soon. Bye for now.